Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Russ Powell is founder and managing director of Sharper B2B Marketing, a man on a mission to deliver the fresh ideas and firepower B2B marketing sorely needs. A B2B marketing heavyweight and B2B tech aficionado, he describes his obsession with understanding what makes people tick. A former stand-up comedian who has shared the stage with the likes of Russell Kane, Tim Vine, Bob Mills and Bill Bailey, he was named as one of John Glur's ones to watch in 2012 and has written material for a variety of radio and TV shows for the likes of BBC and Channel 4. He's the host of the Marketing Magpie podcast, dad to two little Herberts, a bookworm, wordsmith and bang average golfer. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. Russ Powell, welcome to the Extrology podcast. Great to have you as our guest here today. And as is customary with all things Extrology, like to start with some context and early day stuff so we can give people a sense of where you're coming from and where you're at before we go into where you are and where you're headed. So for the benefit of listeners, welcome. And let's start with childhood. Can you tell us about your childhood, where you grew up and perhaps some of those fond memories from that time?
Yeah, sure. And first off, thanks very much for having me on, Lee. Delighted to be here. And I am a born and bred Brightonian. I spent the first 18 years of my life down by the sea in Brighton. And I had a wonderful childhood. Brighton is an incredible place to grow up, incredible place to be a teenager and start to discover the wonders of the world. But my family tree is slightly non-standard, shall we say. So I have three half sisters, but I never lived with my half sisters because I'm a product of second marriages. So I've got sisters old enough to be my mum. In fact, my mum and my sister were pregnant at the same time. So I have a nephew who's older than me, and I have nephews and nieces and great nephews and great nieces all along the south coast now. But but growing up in Brighton was incredible. I think with the beach right there was amazing. I guess the two main things that I did when growing up. So I was heavily into Scouts. So I did Beavers, Cubs, Scouts all the way up to Ventures. Absolutely adored it. It taught me so much. It gave me so much. I even went to the World Scout Jamboree in Thailand as part of the East Sussex contingent. So Scouts was amazing. Scouts was brilliant. And the other sort of main feature of my childhood was I refer to it as the football club. But if I were filming this in my office, you would see the shirt on the wall behind me. I'm working from home today. But my granddad actually founded a football club. They're called White Hawk FC, the second biggest club in Brighton. And granddad founded the club 1945. Was then chairman, president, everything else. My dad played over 1,000 games for White Hawk, then went on to be chairman, treasurer, president, etc., etc. I was the black sheep of the family because I was far better at rugby than I was at football. But the football club, was a massive feature of my childhood. Pretty much every weekend, if I wasn't away camping with the Scouts, I would be at the football club watching.
And for those that are for the benefit of listeners who aren't aware, but that White Hawk is certainly, to your point, second biggest club in Brighton, but also plays at a very sensible standard themselves, as I recall. I mean, what tier of, if we look at it in the English football pyramid, but for the purposes of listeners, for context, whereabouts do they sit within the pyramid scheme? So
they actually got promoted last season. They won the league last season. So they were. And I could never say the word, but Isthmian League.
Isthmian League?
That's it, something like that. Yeah. So they got promoted from there, so they're now the level above that. I couldn't confidently say exactly what level that is, but I think maybe 4 or 5 leagues below sort of like a League 2 level.
It's semi-professional, I guess. Some players will be paid and albeit not at the standard at which we sit here today. And hearing that Kylian Mbappe has been offered 700 million for a year's worth of football in Saudi Arabia, but it's not at that sort of level. But these are lads that are picking up a few quid that are paying for a few beers on a Saturday.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So if you look back on that childhood, were there, I guess, in terms of influences, if you like, were there role models or inspirations growing up that you looked up to, and how therefore did they impact your life?
Yeah, I think I wasn't left wanting for strong role models when I was growing up, which is, I think, quite a very privileged situation to be in. My dad, obviously, being one of those, unfortunately, we lost my dad kind of 14 years ago, but he was a massive part of my childhood, of my life, and obviously still is now. And I was very fortunate that my dad retired early. So he worked for British Rail all his life. He retired just before it got privatised. So from the time that I was maybe 9 or 10, my dad was there constantly, whereas everyone else's dad had to work. My dad didn't. So Dad was always there for rugby matches, for school stuff, for everything. And yeah, he was a constant in my life that taught me the value of hard work, but also the value of relationships and, I guess, service to other people as well. So yeah, Dad was heavily involved in the Scouts, heavily involved in the football club. He was part of a local history group. He had fingers in pies everywhere, basically. And I think one of the things I always remember is at his funeral, it was standing room only in the church. Like there were maybe like 350, 400 people there. And I was just blown away by that. And that was wonderful. So yeah, so Dad was a really strong role model for me. There are a couple of, I think, teachers as well. You only remember the really good ones or the really bad ones. So we had, I had a teacher at my at secondary school. He was my head of year, a Welsh chap by the name of Dowie Vaughan, got me into rugby, and he is the reason that I played rugby, that I fell in love with the game of rugby. And Mr. Vaughan was a great role model and someone there. And then there was also one of my teachers when I was doing my GCSEs, a guy with a very scary name of Dr. Sargent, but he was just a dude. He was such a dude. He was like an old school rocker, and he used to bring in pictures and videos of like him in the 70s, like really long hair, like down to the middle of his back, leather jacket, smoking fags, off to see the Rolling Stones and all that kind of stuff. But again, he taught physics and chemistry when I was doing GCSEs. And one of the things I loved about him was doing chemistry. He actually said to us as a class, he's like, I don't know chemistry, I don't understand it, but as long as I stay one lesson ahead of you guys, I can teach you guys what you need to know to help you get through your GCSEs. So yeah, he was a great guy, and kind of stuck with me as well.
I think one of the things that struck me when first we met was that the role of family and the influence of family, evidenced by, manifest in the form of when, as I say, that first meeting that you and I had, I commented on the football shirt that was behind you in the office. And I think as well, a lovely story around the hammer as well, that I recall, which I think was your father's hammer. Was that right? It was a hammer that he'd used in his working days that you've still got today, framed and on the wall.
Yeah. So as I said, Dad worked for British Rail his whole career. He went into, I believe, the carriage works in Lancing at 16. They didn't have tools, so they had to make their own tools. So Dad had to make this hammer on his first week in British Rail, which I now have on the wall behind me in the office. But yeah, so he went in at the very bottom at British Rail when he was 16, and as I said, retired just before it got privatised, but retired as the head of training for the whole of British Rail. So yeah, the hammer is kind of there as a nice memento of Dad, but also sort of where hard work can get you.
When did business first start to feature in your mind? Because I think I'm right in saying that you studied business management at university. When do you recall starting to take an interest in business first?
So I remember doing business studies at GCSE, and that was kind of like the book learning around business. You learn about profit and loss, you learn about balance sheets and price elasticity and all kinds of stuff like that, and you get the theory and whatever behind it. But kind of thinking back, I was always not even really realizing it, I don't think, but always kind of doing businessy type bits in the background. So I was always that kid in the playground who was selling bits of stuff to try and make a bit of extra pocket money. Or I remember at one time I launched an incredibly successful business of making business cards at school, because everyone in primary school needs business cards. But I saw my dad had business cards, everyone else had business cards. So I thought, oh yeah, all my mates are going to want business cards, not thinking that we just swap them between each other and what was the point of it. But yeah, so I guess I've always sort of thought or had a lean in towards it and trying to think, okay, like how can I make a few extra quid for myself? Like what can I do to get an extra packet of stickers or an extra chocolate bar or whatever? So sort of looking at different ways to do that, basically. And I guess maybe that's what you kind of call like entrepreneurial thinking, and sort of taking a different approach to stuff and looking at where opportunities exist and where the chances are to make happen what you want to make happen. So, but yeah, so I kind of, maybe it's kind of always been there lurking in the background. But yeah, I did business studies at GCSE, really enjoyed that, really loved it. And to be honest with you, I went to university not really knowing what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. But I kind of thought, if you can learn about business and how businesses work and the ins and outs of that and what makes an economy, what helps things grow, what helps do that, there's obvious transferable skill in that to any other walk of life, really. So yeah, I think, I kind of went to uni not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, but knowing that business would be a good grounding for finding out what it is I wanted to do. And I think the irony of it now, looking back on it, is, so obviously you do different modules and stuff when you're going through a uni course. And when we had the chance to do marketing modules at uni, I was like, no, marketing, that's just fluff, that's just rubbish, you don't need to worry about that. So I sort of went through all of uni being like, you don't need to worry about marketing, thinking I was going to come out and be like, I wanted to specialise in being a project manager. And then got on a grad scheme after university, did 6 months of project management and wanted to blow my brains out. It was so bloody dull. And then I was kind of just like, I was on this grad scheme, so I was committed to it for 2 years. So I had to kind of stick with it. And then this marketing role was advertised to kind of the grad community. And I was just like, it's not project management, I'll do it. And went into it, got the role, and I just loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Why? What did you, given to your point at university, you'd mentioned that marketing was fluff, right? And that your words. You then you transition from that project management role that wasn't you straight into marketing, and literally from the get-go you loved it. And why? What was it that ignited that spark for you? So
I think that marketing role was very, very specific. It was an account communications role. So I was on the grad scheme at Fujitsu. They had a client, Thomson Reuters, and it was the marketing of Fujitsu to Thomson Reuters as an existing client, as an account. So essentially it was about how do we Fujitsu effectively engage that concentrated audience of Thomson Reuters decision makers, so they know Fujitsu is doing a great job, they want the relationship to continue, and this is the future we're kind of building together. And it was that sort of that direct channel to people, and it being about, because I think at university marketing was addressed far more in terms of advertising and promotion, which is why I thought it was fluff, which is why a lot of people think marketing is fluff. Whereas the reality of it is that marketing is this many headed beast with lots of different specialisms and lots of different things that you can do with it. So sort of going into this account comms role, it really opened up my eyes to what marketing actually is and what marketing can be and what marketing can do as well, that sort of stripped away all the fluff type of stuff and was like, no, you know what, hang on a minute, this is about people.
Was there a eureka moment, that sort of pivotal moment you recall where you go, wow, that's it, right, I get it?
I think it probably was, so we used to do sort of stakeholder events, like small scale, like roundtable dinners, meet and greets, drinks, all that kind of stuff. And I just joined the account. One had already been set up. So I kind of then joined in to sort of go on safari, I guess, and scope out what was happening and seeing what was going on. And it was just that marketing was the driving force behind why this event was happening. It was set up specifically to do these things, and then seeing those things happen in real life with the people, talking to each other, shaking hands, discussing the things we wanted them to discuss. I was like, this is cool. Like, marketing is a facilitator for this human connection that needs to happen to enable business to be done.
And you went, certainly from a corporate perspective, you enjoyed an extensive and wide range of experience as a marketeer. You worked for not only Fujitsu, as you made mention, but the likes of Dell, Symantec, Microsoft, Atos, big corporate entities. That what do you think that experience as a marketeer in those sorts of environments had taught you?
So I've worked at some big brands, but I've also worked at some very small companies as well. And I think working for the bigger brands is great because it gives you exposure to such a wide range of different disciplines within marketing. So for instance, in those bigger companies, I worked in sort of that account comms role. I worked in a central campaigns team. I worked in a data role, an events role, sort of a European marketing type role, like a specific email campaign role as well. So I think those larger organizations give you such a breadth of experience that you can tap into in all those different disciplines of marketing. But then on the flip side, when I've then worked at smaller organizations, it gives you a far deeper view of what marketing is and what marketing needs to do. Because if you go from a big team of 15, 20 marketers where everyone's got their specialism, everyone does their bits that they need to know how to do, you then go from that going into another organization where you are the marketing department as a single individual. You have to learn on your feet pretty quickly. You have to pick up all these different things, and you have to be almost like I guess like a Swiss Army knife of a marketer, that you're able to do a variety of different things all at the same time. And I think as well, it's a personality fit as well. Some people like working in those big organizations where they can specialize, where they can get that breadth of understanding. Some people like working in the smaller organizations where it is more seat of your pants, firefighting, trying to get everything done at the same time. But yeah, I wouldn't say one was better than the other. I would say it's different based on personality fit and also what stage you are in your career as well. I think I was able, when I was early on in my career, I went contracting after I finished the graduate scheme, which enabled me to get this breadth of experience in quite a short space of time as well. So yeah.
It's a brave move, I think, respectfully, but a relatively young stage in your career, and I think particularly where, so often, I've worked with many people over the years who've made a conscious decision to go down the route of contracting as a career choice and been incredibly successful with it. I've met people who were forced through circumstances to consider contracting or temporary work because perhaps the permanent option was, for whatever reason, wasn't available to them at the time. There's lots of different reasons as to why people go down that route. But it does take a certain confidence because you've got, frankly, what is a permanent job these days? But we all crave fundamental human psychology. It's kind of like we crave certainty. I find that fascinating that we wake up every morning craving that certainty. It's arguably what drives us out of bed. But we've got uncertainty, unlimited uncertainty, through every day. We're always looking for a little bit of control, but uncertainty, can happen things can happen at any time. But it takes I would suggest takes a real confidence in your own ability and what you can offer to be able to do that. Is that a fair assumption? Did you feel like that person at that time?
Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it was confidence. Maybe it's kind of the arrogance of youth as well. So because I'd finished the graduate scheme at Fujitsu, and I had two choices, and I wanted to stay in marketing. I know that I wanted to be a marketer and stay in marketing, but there were no permanent roles in marketing available when I got to the end of the graduate scheme. So the options were either go back to project management, which wasn't an option, or essentially take voluntary redundancy and go and find something else. So I took the voluntary redundancy and went out and found something else, which happened to be a role at Microsoft. And I mean, living in Reading, not short of choice for tech companies based around there.
But not an easy place to get into, though, to be fair to you.
No, not well. I mean, if you live in Reading, most people probably have worked for Microsoft at some point in their career. But yeah, I mean, to get into a full, because there's a whole thing there. A lot of people that work at Microsoft aren't full Microsoft employees. You have to spend a lot of time, and then you get made up to a full Microsoft employee. But yeah, I kind of thought I just didn't want to sit and just bob along doing something I didn't want to do. I would much rather take the risk and do something I really did want to do. If that took a bit of time to happen, then so be it. But I knew that I wanted to be a marketer. I knew that I didn't want to go back to project management. So the only option was to go forward and find something else.
It would be amiss, and clearly we're here today not least to talk about you and importantly what you're doing with Sharper. But before we come on to that, it would be amiss of me not to at least probe around your experiences as a stand-up comedian, which I think. So tell us as to how did that come about? Where does So how do you, too many questions in one go, never a good premise, but I'm struck with this sense of, well, how do you decide one day, right, I'm going to be a stand-up comic? Because I think that, one, it's incredibly brave. You talk about risk, someone who would take risks, we can come on to that. But how did your comedy career begin?
Yeah, so I've always loved comedy ever since I was little. Like I always remember being little, watching like Russ Abbott on a Sunday night, like with my family, or watching, it's very, very tame comedy, or watching like Last of the Summer Wine and stuff like that on telly. And as I was growing up, like my Christmas list would always be stand-up DVDs. Like that's all I'd want, stand-up or sitcoms and things like that, just because I loved comedy, I loved jokes, and I loved making people laugh. And I guess I'd never really considered being a stand-up myself until, and it was actually, and it's no coincidence, it was the year that my dad passed away, and I was still at Fujitsu, and one of the other grads was organising a charity comedy night, and he was just like, Russ, you're funny. Like, you should just have a go at doing it, mate. And I was like, do you know what? Like, I've got nothing to lose. It's going to be a friendly audience. It's going to be people I know from work. So, you know what? Why the hell not? So I did my first ever gig, the 13th of December 2009. Not that it's seared into my memory in any way, but yeah, cobbled together 6 or 7 minutes of material that was largely based around being from Brighton and the preconceptions people have around people who come from Brighton. You can kind of guess where we're going with that. And yeah, did that gig. It was in Reading, in a bar that it was called Deja Vu. I don't think it exists anymore. And it went really well. Like people laughed in all the right places. Nobody booed. Nobody cheered for me to get off or anything like that. And I got to the end and everyone clapped and everyone was like, oh, you did really well. And I was like, yeah, I really enjoyed that. That was really good fun. And I then kind of sort of then started to look at, okay, how do I do this? How do I book gigs? Like, how do I go and do this properly? And I then booked in to do the Gong Show at the comedy store. I think it's called the Lion's Den, they call it, or maybe that's another one. But essentially, it's that. So the premise of a gong show is you have to try and get to 5 minutes on stage without getting booed off by the crowd. And
that's brutal.
It's a bear pit. Like it is literally like people were going up and getting gonged off before they'd even said anything.
It's almost like the entertainment is in failure. They're wanting you, they're willing you almost to fail. Yeah. The expectation is you're going to fail. That's part of the fun for the audience, right? That's barbaric.
Yeah. People are actively wanting you to be terrible. They actively want you to not be very good so they can get you off straight away. So that would have been my first ever proper type gig.
And is there a sort of pre-qualify? Is it to qualify for that?
No.
Other than a propensity to kind of, to beat you, want to get yourself beaten up, metaphorically speaking, of course. But there's literally no sort of qualification process. It's just, are you up for it or not?
No, it was literally, you had to ring up the comedy store and say, I want to do the gong show. They'll be like, right, next date available is this day. What's your name? You're booked in. You turn up. So I had that booked in. That would have been my first ever proper show. But I was sort of chatting to other comics as I was trying to get gigs booked in. I was like, I've got my first proper gig booked in. It's the gong show at the store. And they were like, oh, bloody hell, Russ. Like, you don't want to do that as your first gig. So I booked in another one randomly. No, actually, it was one of my friends booked it in for me. He invited me out for a drink in London to a comedy show and was like, oh, I've booked for you to do your jokes. And I was like, oh, thanks, mate. Appreciate that. So basically just redid the material I did at the first ever one and did that. But again, it went well. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm onto something. So did the gong show at the store, and I beat the gong. So I got to the 5 minutes, and it was me and one other guy beat the gong. So we were the last two, and then if you beat the gong, you then get to come back and you get to do another 2 minutes to then see who is king of the gong or whatever it was. And I remember doing my 5 minutes, didn't get gonged, run off the stage. I was like elated, like went back to the crowd. I was like, yeah, come on. And then they invited me back up on stage again. And I was like, I haven't got another 2 minutes. And the compere was like, good luck. And just sort of then bodged together some ideas. Obviously didn't win it because the other guy had more material there. But I was then kind of thinking like, okay, like I might be onto something here. If I can do this and do all right, then maybe there's a bit of something here. And then it just really kind of just snowballed from there. I just kept on booking in gigs, kept on doing them, and yeah, I just loved it. I think I did in like the first full year that I did it, and maybe did somewhere in the region of like 100 to 150 gigs in a year, and was just going around the country, telling jokes, making friends, and just having a brilliant time, basically.
If we go back before we dig deeper into this, I think this is fascinating. Do you remember the feeling before, if you go back to the gong, the night of the gong, you're beating the gong, that night before you're first about to go on stage? Do you remember how you felt? And if so, how did that manifest? What was it? What was the sensation, the feelings, the emotions that were going through your mind?
I can't really remember, to be honest with you. It was probably...
Were you nervous? I guess is my question. Were you nervous, or did you just think, I'll roll with this. I've got nothing to lose?
Absolutely. And I mean, because you're sat there in the crowd waiting to go up on stage, they just call your name. You're not in a green room, you're not backstage or anything like that. It's literally you have to come out of the crowd to go up. And I think like the 5 or 6 people before me that had been on, like hadn't even made it to a minute, had been gonged off pretty quickly. So I was like, oh, fucking hell, here we go. This is gonna be something. And then just went up, and then it was always bizarre. Like I remember always being nervous before going on stage, but then there would just be this, I don't know, I'd just be in the zone. There would just be this calm that would come over, and I just sort of chunk through the material that was in my head and get it out and things like that. And it's even after a few years that I'd been doing the circuit and kind of built up a routine, built up material, things like that. It kind of got to this point where certain bits of material I could just do on autopilot, and you'd just be saying the words, not really thinking about it. But what you are thinking about is how the crowd are reacting, who's talking to who about that over there, who's saying something over there, who's just got up to go for a wee, all of that kind of stuff. And it then helps you draw on those things that are happening in the audience, the reaction you're getting, to then make what you're saying even better, because you can then bring people into it more. Because it's a monologue, it's a very one-sided thing. It's like, I'm on stage, I'm talking, you need to listen. But if you can do that, but then also start to draw people in at the same time, it just makes it much more richer for everybody.
It's a real gift. Making people laugh is a wonderful thing. But I think the thing that struck me is that you mentioned, was it that first year or so, 150, did you say 200 gigs?
Yeah, probably
traipsing around
that.
The country. And I'd imagine if it's anything, and I don't know, but I'm not to make any assumption, I'm interested in your insight, but that similarly to the music industry, if you're an aspiring musician, you don't all of a sudden one night appear on stage at Wembley Stadium. There are years of trawling the pubs and clubs, paying to, on a wet Wednesday night in Blackburn, playing to two guys drunk in a corner and a cat or whatever it might be. You've got that in the music industry.
Yeah.
But that's about perfecting your art and having the courage to keep coming back and getting up. Is comedy similar? Am I drawing the wrong parallels, or was that your experience?
Yeah, it's very, very, very similar. Yeah, I a wet Wednesday night in the New Forest. I remember doing a gig to an audience that was more dogs than people. That was a good one. But yeah, it's very, very, very similar. And I think with anything like comedy, like music, you only get better at it by doing it. Like comedy, you can't just sit in your room and tell jokes to yourself in the mirror. I mean, you can, but you're not going to get very far doing it. You have to get out there in front of an audience, and you have to know how to be in a room, how to be on stage, how to hold a microphone, where to look, where to stand, where to move to, how to pace things, how to bring someone in if they're adding something beneficial, how to put someone down if they're not adding something beneficial. And those things that form it's a bit of a wanky word, but the stagecraft of comedy, you can't learn anywhere else other than being on a stage and doing it.
And does comedy, are there influencers, mentors? Will comedians share their knowledge and their experience and say, oh, try this? Or is it quite a unique, it kind of what works for you doesn't work for Joe Bloggs, the comedian? There is that kind of uniqueness to it.
So I think it's very different at the different levels of comedy. So when you're on the open mic circuit and kind of everyone's trying to get to that next rung and get ahead of the other people, it's quite cutthroat. Like, people won't and don't share stuff, because if I give you a thing that means you get a gig, you get to book a gig, that means I can't book that gig. So why would I tell you to do that? So so
it's a very competitive world,
very,
right?
very competitive.
It's very competitive.
As you're coming up doing the open mic, where you start super, super competitive, and I've seen it myself, like a lot of backstabbing, a lot of people spreading rumors about other people to make things happen or not happen for them. And so yeah, it's a bit of a wild west. However, once you kind of get a level where you're a bit more established and you're doing what I would kind of call proper gigs, where you have, rather than it being 10 to 15 acts all doing 5 minutes each, and it's kind of just you chunk through it, where you've got a compare, you've got an opener, a middle spot, and a headliner, things are a bit more settled and people are more willing to share and talk and even workshop stuff. I remember being at a gig before, and someone had come off stage and they were like, oh, I tried this bit, but I don't think it really worked. And then we were like, oh yeah, you know what, why don't you maybe try doing it this way, or bringing in a different word, or using this word, and things like that. And then it's a bit more, I guess, a bit more friendly that way. So yeah, and I think it's I think because it's one of those things, it's like music or like any of the arts, it's not always necessarily a meritocracy. It's like the best people aren't always the ones that break through and get to those upper levels. And this isn't knocking anybody that's done that, but I know some incredible comedians, like some of the funniest people I've ever met, who just haven't got that break to get through to the mainstream, to get through to those upper levels. And they're some of the most talented, most quick-witted, funny, brilliant people, but unfortunately they're still slogging around on that circuit, kind of doing like gigs for £100 on a wet Tuesday kind of thing, you know.
I think you make a really good point. You just we all need, I think it's true in business as well. You know, look at it from a business. I want to make sure we've plenty of time to reflect on your experiences and what you're doing with Sharper. But I think it's true in business, isn't it? We all need something to ignite somewhere. And I think there are lots of business manuals that might suggest otherwise, but you can have the most compelling of propositions, but you need somebody somewhere to buy into that, for you to ignite that spark and give you that lift from which you can then accelerate. And I think you need a bit of luck in all walks of life, whatever it might be. There's an element of right place, right time. But lastly, before as I say, I do want to give you plenty of chance to talk about Sharper and your experiences as a marketeer. But I read that Jongleurs listed you as one to watch for 2012, which was, that's a significant of itself is a significant. There was you were gaining some momentum. As a comedian, is there one kind of the most memorable moment, if you like, from your comedy career that really stands out for you?
Oh, most memorable. I'd probably say that one of the highlight, I guess, because things being memorable, again, like teachers, you remember the best and the worst. I think one of the best memories I have is when I did tour support for Stuart Francis. So he's the Canadian one-liner type comic. And that was the biggest gig I ever did, which was Wolverhampton Civic Hall to 1,500 people.
Uh-huh.
And it was just, when you're in a gig that size, you're on a stage that's quite high up. The audience is completely pitch black and you can't actually see anybody. And I remember going up on stage and just doing my first joke, and then just this wall of laughter just sort of washed over me from the crowd. And it's a bit like football or rugby or whatever, like you need that first touch of the ball to settle yourself into the game and stuff like that. And I remember being on that stage and this wall of laughter just came over me, and I was like, yeah, you know what, this is going to be a good gig, this is going to be really good. And it was a great gig, and sort of did my sort of opening spot for Stuart, and it went really well. And it was just that, I guess just not being able to see people, but knowing that you'd still connected with people was I think a really nice moment.
Was there a point at which you thought back to that? Okay, so I'm enjoying this. I'm getting some real highs off it. I mean, an awful lot of blood, sweat, and tears. I don't deny there would have been some regular nights too amongst those. I guess peaks and troughs inevitable in any career, whatever you might choose to do. But was there a point at which you thought, right, back to the day job? Marketing is my passion, my pursuit. There are problems. We'll come on to those. There are problems that I acknowledge exist within B2B marketing in particular that I feel I've got the smarts to solve and address some of those complex issues. That's what I want to do. How do you bring yourself down from the stage lights, laughter washing over you, and you've got to get into the day job? How does that happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, the day job was still there because I was still doing a 9-to-5 proper job at the same time. So I would kind of be doing my day job during the day, and then I'd be driving to wherever to do gigs in the evening. And we talked about it before. The two really fed into each other because, as I said, marketing is all about how you connect with people, as is stand-up. So a lot of what I learned from stand-up fed into marketing, but a lot of what I learned from marketing also fed into stand-up as well. And they really sort of helped each other.
How has comedy influenced your approach to marketing, do you think, and communication?
So with comedy, what you are always trying to do is elicit the emotional response you want from people as quickly as you possibly can. And in comedy, obviously, the emotional response you want from people is laughter. You want them to be entertained, but sometimes you do also need to take them in different directions. You make them feel something. There's pathos that you have to inject into things and things like that. And it's about how can you use words and the meaning of those words and the context of those words delivered in a certain way to essentially get people to do what you want them to do, which is to laugh or to feel something or to engage with something. And for me, that's exactly the same as what marketing should be doing. It should be, how do you effectively communicate with people to get them to do what you want them to do? And in marketing, that's to buy some stuff at the end of the day, but it's also to download a white paper or give us your contact details or whatever, all those different calls to action as well. But it's really, I think, what comedy taught me about marketing and what is injected a lot into what we do at Sharper is that human connection, because marketing is about people. Even though it's business to business, and this is something that's been done to death in the B2B circles, it's business to business, but it's still people to people. Businesses don't make decisions. The people within those businesses make decisions. So how can you appeal to their emotional, illogical, irrational side of things to capture their attention, to make them think and understand that, oh yeah, they get my world, they understand my challenges, they get the pain I'm going through. And then how can they help me deal with those challenges? How can they help me get to a better place? And yeah, so I think how language is used, how words are used, the blend of sort of imagery and words as well, and the psychology that sits behind that. For me, comedy and marketing are one and the same, really.
So what was the inspiration and story behind Sharper B2B Marketing? So
I had the idea for Sharper, God, it would have been 5 or 6 years ago now. It was when I was working agency side, but I was the head of marketing for the agency, so doing B2B marketing for the agency. And that was like a PPC SEO agency who were firmly focused on sort of retail and sport and things like that. But the more I was talking to other marketers and looking at it, I was like, there's definitely space here to do B2B marketing in a different, more creative, more inventive way. So because I'd spent most of my career at these big blue chip organizations where creativity wasn't really a thing. Like everyone has a blue logo, everyone uses the same stock imagery, everyone's churning out white papers and one pages and webinars and things like that in the vain hope that it'll get people to download or part with contact details. And it was just, for me, like there's got to be a better way to do this. Like, and if you just do the same things you've always done, you're going to get the same results you always got, or worse, because of the law of diminishing returns. So do something different. Like, don't be afraid to stand out and challenge and be creative and inventive and capture people's attention in different ways. And so that was kind of really the basis for Sharper. And yeah, I'd sort of started to think about Sharper coming into existence in a more meaningful way for a few years, but it was never the right time. So sort of I got married and had kids and things like that, and we never really had the coffers there to support sort of 6 months to a year of not earning anything whilst things get off the ground. And then February 2020, I got made redundant from a client-side role. The company folded just before COVID kicked in properly, and like 45 of us all got made redundant February 2020. And I had interviews lined up, I had interviews in the diary, but as lockdown kind of took hold, those all evaporated and everyone stopped hiring. And I was at home just putting stuff out on LinkedIn, just trying to find trying to find anything to do really that would bring some money in, help pay the mortgage, keep the kids fed and stuff like that. And I was putting stuff out on LinkedIn, and I was connected to a guy called Dom Hawes, who is CEO of our now parent company, Selby Anderson, and was putting stuff out on LinkedIn. Dom liked or commented on one of the posts that I put out. So I messaged him on LinkedIn and sort of said, like, thanks very much for liking, sharing the post. Like, I'm trying to find something at the moment. By the way, I've seen what you do. You don't have need for a senior B2B marketer who's been around the block a few times, do you? And he messaged me back and he said, you know what, actually we do. So this was a Wednesday morning. I messaged Dom, had a phone call with Dom Wednesday afternoon. The day after, I spoke to the group COO. So it's the Thursday. On the Friday, I had a conversation with Dom and the COO, a guy called Simon, again. They offered me a job. A laptop arrived over the weekend. And then Monday, they were like, right, we've got this agency that exists in the group already. Do you want to take that on and try and make that something? Or shall we do something different? And I had the business plan for Sharper sat in my back pocket. And I was like, look, I've got this. Let's do this. And essentially, Dom and Selby Anderson took a punt on me and the idea for Sharper. And yeah, now here we are, 3.5 years later, team of 7, working with some of the biggest sort of B2B tech brands on the planet, running global campaigns for them. And I think it kind of ties back to what you were saying before about everyone needs a bit of luck, but I'm a firm believer that you can make your own luck as well.
I was just going to say there's a constant theme. If we seamlessly take that back to comedy, you know, you do strike me as someone who you're making things happen. So yes, there are other parts, other influential factors at play, and other people have to bite on that action, if you like. Like, for example, even your audience with your first gig and that laughter. But you're making it happen. You're taking ownership. You're driving it. You're putting the fuel in the engine to make it happen. And that's a really constant theme through everything you've described.
Yeah, and because I kind of think, like, nobody's going to give you anything for free. If you want something to happen, you've got to go out and make it happen. And it's something I always remember. So going way back, this is back to Brighton times, but I used to DJ as well. Used to absolutely love DJing. This was still on vinyl as well. That's how old I am. Not that old though, but kind of turn of the century. I always like to say it. But I remember I booked a gig with this other DJ. This other DJ needed someone to sort of do warm up stuff like that, and I booked this gig, did the gig, and then I waited. And I waited for him to get back in touch to get me in to do something else. And I waited for the club to get back in touch for me to do something else. And I waited, and no one called, no one rang, no one wanted me to do anything. And I was just like, okay, I need to make this happen. If I want something to happen, if I want something to become a thing, you need to do it. You need to ring people, send emails, badger people, talk to people, just do it. JFDI, just get out there and just make it happen. And I guess, I don't know, I think it's a lot of it is, and we kind of talked about Dad a lot actually, but I think it's Dad passing away when I was in my early 20s as well, sort of gave me that mentality in a positive way. Gave me that mentality of, fuck it. If you want to do it, just do it. Like, life's too short. No one's going to just come up and hand you something that you want to do. If you want to do it, just get out there and make it happen. And I think that's kind of baked into the whole story of Sharper starting is, what if I hadn't have put that post on LinkedIn? What if I hadn't have messaged Dom? What if Dom had been busy and couldn't speak that afternoon or whatever? What would have happened? But it doesn't matter what if, because it did happen.
But if you didn't ask the question, you never would have known, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's go back a step then, if I may, if you've got time. I think the differentiator, you made that point around marketeers, kind of that conformist element to B2B marketing, and that, fear was the word that strikes me. It's like, no, there's a certain framework, there are guardrails, you can't break out of those guardrails for fear of what message that might impart. It strikes me that there's fear that's driving that decision-making process, but consistent throughout your career has been, okay, so you've faced your fears, or maybe I'm thinking in terms of facing my fears, standing up on stage and thinking I've got to make people laugh. That you face those fears and push through. And is that what informs many of your creative decisions, if you like, as a marketeer as well?
Yeah, I mean, we have pitched some absolutely bonkers ideas to clients in terms of campaigns and what we could do for them. And it's one of the pieces of feedback we always get from clients, which is great, is basically like, we love all your ideas, we just don't know which one to pick. And like I said, yeah, a lot of it is based on fear as well. And it's a really misguided fear as well, because especially working in these big corporate organizations, you have brand guidelines, you have processes, you have a certain way that things need to be done. But if you do the same thing that everyone else is doing, you're not going to stand out, you're not going to be meaningfully different. And it then means there is no reason why someone would buy something from you over any of your competitors. And in the world that we exist, where competition is massive, it's hyper competitive, you have to stand out. If you don't stand out, you get left behind. And it's why, like, we always lead with creativity in everything we do. And like we have 4 values as an agency, as a business, which is creativity, tenacity, fairness, and fun. So it's got to be creative. So you've got to stand out. You've got to be meaningfully different. You've got to be tenacious in what you're doing. I guess that's kind of like the whole just making shit happen, not taking no for an answer, and doing everything you can to get the results you need. Fairness, I think, is something that I wanted to imbue in Sharper, because I've worked in organizations before which were very, very unfair in terms of how they approach things. So it's always just making sure everyone has a voice, everyone feels respected, and everybody feels heard. And then the final one of fun is just because if you're not having fun, then what's the point? Like, life's too short, again, like, to be stuck doing something you don't want to do. And even if we are working on something that maybe it is a bit dull, maybe it is a bit dry, maybe it is a bit boring, but there's still fun you can have with that, and there's still fun you can inject into how you do things as well.
What is it that you do to inform your own kind of creative process or thought, or your own creativity? How do you fuel that stuff?
I read a lot.
I read you describe yourself as a bookworm. Is that fair?
Yeah, I am quite a bookworm. So yeah, I read a lot of business books, but I read a lot of fiction. I read a lot of sort of psychology, and I like architecture type books, design books, stuff like that as well. But what I also find really important and really, really helps me, and it's something we've talked about as a team as well, is stepping away from things. So I go running quite often, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. I've also just recently taken up boxing as well, which I do that sort of on a Wednesday evening at a club just around the corner from the office.
In a ring sparring?
Not at a level of sparring yet. Still just pad work at the moment. I'm not up to.
Is that the plan though? Do you want to? Because it strikes me you're a glutton for punishment in the nicest possible way, and I admire that hugely. But
yeah.
Throwing yourself out there into the lion's den is a regular occurrence. It strikes me.
But I think it's just about. I think it's really just about pushing myself out of my comfort zone as well, because it's something I really believe in, and something that I talk to friends quite a lot about, actually, is there is a massive difference between being happy and being comfortable. And some people confuse the two. Some people get comfortable and think they're happy when they're not. They're just comfortable. They're just bobbing along. Everything's all right. Nothing's really challenging me or irking me or whatever, and yeah, I'm fine, like if that's what people want to do, then fair play, go for it. But I'm happiest when there's a bit of discomfort, if that makes sense, when there's a bit of a challenge, when there's a bit of something new, when I am pushing into new areas and finding something different. So yeah, with the boxing, I'm still just at pad work. Nothing's actively tried to hit me back yet, which is kind of the next level.
I think that's a test. I love that the Mike Tyson quote. I think it was Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
That everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Something along to that.
Yeah,
I think, you're right. That's where the test, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, that's something that but I think for me, the boxing is great. And I know we talked about it briefly when we spoke before, but I had, we'll call it I guess a mental health wobble earlier this year. And sort of did some CBT and have worked through it, and I'm in a really good place now. But I think the boxing has really helped with that, because for that hour when I'm in the gym, hitting the bags, doing burpees, skipping, doing the pad work, whatever, I am 100% present. I can't think about what's happened in that day. I can't think about what I'm doing tomorrow, because I am there, and I am only there in that gym for that hour. And it's a break from being inside your own head as well. And you get to remove yourself from the everyday stuff that we all have to go through. And I think it's those breaks and taking that time to let your brain reset, to let the gaps open up and to think about other stuff is vitally important when it comes to being creative as well. Because if someone says, right, sit at your laptop and be creative, like you can't do that. Like creativity breeds in the gaps that appear in thoughts and the things when your brain shifts into a different pattern and a different level. And so I think getting active, putting yourself in different scenarios and states of mind and pushing yourself out of where you're comfortable, I think is vital for that creative process.
So what drives you, Russ?
What drives me? I would say, obviously, my wife and my kids are kind of my North Star. They're kind of what everything is centered around and what it's all about, really. And I guess this kind of ties back to what you were saying before about family and everything like that. That everything I do in terms of exercise and looking after myself and what I'm trying to build with Sharper as well is all for the end goal of making sure that we have a great family life, that I can be present as a dad, as a husband, as an uncle, as a friend, as whatever as well. So I think it goes back to being in service of others, I would say.
So what does success mean to you?
That's a very, very good question, because so I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and there is this whole hustle porn success warrior type thing of like, I get up before I go to sleep. I run a marathon every morning, and like I only eat kale and all of this kind of stuff. And it's just bollocks. It's just clickbaity type stuff that I don't think the people posting it even believe in. And there's a lot of waffle, and there's a lot of people telling other people what success should be, or what success needs to be considered successful. And you kind of see these people with flashy houses and cars and watches and all that kind of stuff. And what you don't see in the background is that they've not paid the mortgage for a few months, and that car's on lease and needs paying up, and the watch they borrowed from somebody else and all things like that. And it's just peacocking and nonsense for social media. So I guess for me, like, I'm not pursuing material, That's sounding really philosophical now, but like, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to live in a mansion.
No, not at all. I think you make a really good point. Success I believe success is a uniquely personal thing.
Absolutely.
You can't, so everybody has their own definition of success to them.
Yeah.
And yet, to your point, we are pushed these images of success or how we believe success should be measured, oftentimes through material accumulation of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And hence why I'm always fascinated by the question and why I ask the question on these podcasts, because I genuinely believe it is a uniquely personal thing. Your definition of success will be different to mine and different arguably to the next 10, and rightly so. It can only be defined by what it means to you and how it manifests for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I guess I would see success as having the time to do what you want to do with that time. You know what I mean? Because time, the only thing that we're all running out of. Like it's the only finite resource that we all have. And I think success is being able to spend the time you have doing the things you love with the people that you love as well. So success for me is being able to be creative. I get to be creative on a daily basis. I get to come up with weird, wonderful, wacky ideas that we then get to bring to life. I get time to go running and to do boxing. I get time to spend with my wife, with my kids, with our friends and family and things like that. So yeah, I think that I don't think success is an end goal. I don't think that you can get to success and then you're done. I think, like you say, success is a very personal thing based on what is important to that individual. And for me, it's being able to do what I love and having the time to spend with the people I love.
What excites you about the future?
Not generative AI and machine learning and all that stuff that's all the fluff that's going on around that at the moment. I guess what excites me about, and I guess kind of breaking that down into different areas as well. I guess what excites me about the future of Sharper is that we're growing. We've navigated quite a tricky H1 this year, as it has been for many other businesses. But we are in a position now where we are on quite a steady growth trajectory. And I think that there's masses more that we can do as an agency, sort of untapped potential that we have to put even more of a dent in sort of the world of B2B marketing. I think on a personal level, what excites me about the future is, I've got two boys who are growing up, 7 and 4 now, and seeing what the wonders of that, what that entails as they grow and they get older and they start to explore their own interests and what they may want to do and how I and my wife can help them be the best versions of themselves as well.
And a question I always like to ask of guests on Extrology, but looking back with the benefit of hindsight, always, of course, a wonderful thing. What advice might you give 21-year-old Russ Powell?
Oh, so where was 21-year-old Russ Powell? So 21-year-old Russ Powell was on placement year from university, working for Vauxhall Motors in Luton. And 21-year-old Russ Powell was having a very good year, actually. That was probably my favourite year of university. I've made some lifelong friends during that year who I still speak to. We still visit each other now. But I would say to 21-year-old Russ, like, just worry less. Everything will work itself out because you will make it work out.
Russ, it's been brilliant. I think it's some wonderful insight that you've afforded us, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share with listeners your experiences, your journey. I have a lot of admiration for the way that you've just literally thrown yourself into things and made those things happen. And I appreciate a lot of blood, sweat and tears will have gone into those outcomes. But nonetheless, the fact that you take the leap in the first place is I think the lesson we take away from this is that you've got to go and do those things, or they won't simply happen for you. And I think it was lovely to hear of how you took that experience as a DJ and waiting for that next booking and thinking, hang on a minute, that's not how life works. That almost that one lesson you've taken and throughout the rest of your life have gone, no, I will keep pushing through and making those things happen. So there's a lot for listeners to take away. And I think I really appreciate your time. It's been great to speak with you. I wish you and your colleagues and everybody associated with Sharper B2B continued success, and we look forward to watching you continue to flourish. And indeed, from your own perspective, whether or not we see you on a stage at any point again soon, I wonder: is there still content material around that we can? The beauty of social media. Where could listeners go to find out more if they wanted to?
Yeah, so I kind of always like to say that I'm not an ex-stand-up comic. I'm a recovering stand-up comic. So.
It's a lovely way of looking at it.
Yeah. So their comedy will always be there. There will always be stages and microphones that need someone on them. But yeah. No, I mean, I completely appreciate you getting me on the pod as well, Lee. It's been a wonderful chat, and thank you very much for having me on. If anyone wants to find out any more about Sharper, we have a website, sharperb2b.com. And if there are any B2B marketers listening, we've also recently launched a little campaign of our own called The Karma. So if you go to the-karma.com/home, there's some nice little resources in there to help any stressed out or stretched thin B2B marketers deal with their day a little bit better.
Fantastic. Russ, it's been great to have you on as a guest. Really appreciate your time. Good luck for all you've going on. Here's to a very bright future. And look forward to chatting you again one day soon, maybe.
Nice one. Cheers, Lee. Thank you.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.